Uh, like I said, in the past and now even more so in the future, that'll be the
Yeah,
case because it can scale a little bit more since it's a private market, especially if like tools and solutions like ours are out. So, whether it's, a lot of the tech that goes into,
yeah,
this running and functioning to, solar panels, et cetera, were originally built for space, actually work best in space. And we even have cases next year where we're working on really what's the future and the infrastructure for computation, AI, crypto
yeah.
mining by utilizing space. So whether it's the origin or the future, a lot of the solutions for the things you care about or the market are going to originate in space, are going to come from space.
Welcome to the New World Podcast, where we delve into the ever changing and accelerating pace of global change and its impact on our lives. I'm your host, John Paul Flores, broadcasting live from the New World Studio. Today, we're diving into the world of AI and automation. As an enthusiast and expert in lead generation, I will guide you through understanding and leveraging these technologies for your business and for your personal use. And don't forget, AI and automation might be unstoppable forces, but that doesn't mean you are powerless. Tune in to learn how to make them work for you and not the other way around. But first, let's meet our guest. Welcome to the New World Podcast, where we navigate the changing world around us. I'm your host, John Paul Flores, specializing in lead generation and AI automation, here to help you understand how our world is changing and what it means for you. In this episode, we're excited to welcome Grant Blaisdell, the co-founder and CEO of Copernic Space. Grant is a visionary in the intersection of blockchain and space, and he's here to share insights on how his company is revolutionizing access to space assets. We'll dive into his journey from early tech enthusiasm to the groundbreaking projects, including Copernic Space and CoInfirm. Get ready for a deep dive into the future of space and blockchain technology with one of the industry's leading innovators. Grant, it's a pleasure to have you on the show.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
By the way, before we begin on the in-depth questions, because I do have some, do you mind letting us know a quick intro on who Grant is, what's your expertise, your experiences, and what keeps you busy these days?
Sure. Well, once again, my name's Grant Blaisdell. Currently, I'm CEO and co-founder of Copernic Space. I view myself as a creator. So originally, since I was very young as a kid, it was music. But my first startup when I was 19 was focused on digital media and its distribution, monetization across mobile, actually. And this was in 2006, even before the iPhone was out. So, kind of pushing the boundaries on that as well. But that whole kind of idea and model of creating new platforms with new models for digital IP or any sort of digital assets brought me into the blockchain industry over a decade ago. So I'm kind of what you would call an OG in the space, which led me eventually to also co-founding and being chief marketing officer of CoinFirm, which is a leading big data analytics and AML platform for crypto and blockchain assets. But I'm third generation space, so all this Copernic space aspect. The roots start with my grandfather, who helped build a national space program in Europe, an original national space program in Europe, and has the earliest works I know of around this concept of democratizing access to space. So that's like the roots that Copernic Space was built on. I still have music as a part of my life on the side. I'm a partner and shareholder in Big Idea, which is also the owner of things like Clout Festival and Tixi, which is a native ticketing app that we've developed that also utilizes blockchain technology to control fraud and the secondary market. But due to the important scale size of the opportunity that we're building at Copernic Space, I choose for that to be my full-time job focus and mission in life currently.
That's amazing. And if you don't mind letting us know what happened to your first startup.
Uh, I wasn't mature enough, in my
Yeah,
opinion, at that moment in time to take it where it needed to go.
yeah,
Also, timing is important. So, being early isn't my issue. Seeing that curve coming up isn't my issue. But when you're that early, you need to really persevere, build traction in ways so that when the market is ready, it can pop, and you have that staying power to be there in that moment. So that's a lesson that I've taken, and I've applied to further things in life in general, but obviously my future ventures as well. But I still have a knack for being quite early.
coin firm is mainly, if not most of what it does, is an anti money laundering platform. Is that correct?
Correct, correct. But we really took a different approach and innovation towards the entire idea of AML and how those products look,
Yeah.
work, their efficiency and effectiveness. Also, because blockchain technology enables for that sort of analysis.
When you first started in that space, how common was money laundering at the time using blockchain?
Well, from our analysis, really, like the numbers are not like bigger in comparison, like per capita or whatever, are not bigger in comparison to traditional. Actually, we made AML much more effective around crypto than it is currently being done in the traditional financial space. So when we came out, it was also, quite visionary. You had one side of traditional finance that was like, well, crypto and AML, but crypto is all about money laundering, which is totally not true. On the flip side, the kind of maximalist crypto people at the time were like, well, crypto is never going to have something like AML controls or measures around it. So, the truth is usually somewhere in the middle there. So, it's not, we didn't view we viewed what we're doing as an important bridge that would enable thousands of new ventures and players to formally enter and participate in the crypto market by giving them an efficient and almost an automated tool that acted almost like a utility for them. So break down those barriers so that AML is not something just for big financial institutions that can pull off major manual labor.
Do you think it was very important at that time to actually create this anti money laundering systems, especially before the big crypto boom? Because a few years back, that it just exploded everything.
Yeah, so we were, for example, the first company that could
Yeah,
service, ICOs, initial coin offerings, and things like that. So yeah, we were ahead of the curve. It took a couple years till it popped, but that's as with anything that's really, transformative, innovative, and you're seeing that with Copernic Space as well, and you've seen that with, any of those big platforms that really change something in our markets.
and you founded most of your companies to the idea that you create something first and wait for the market to adapt to it. Is that correct?
Well, I don't think you can. I think a lot of times it's not a matter of waiting. You kind of
Yeah,
build the market yourself as well.
yeah,
So you get out there and you begin communicating, not just what you're doing, but the value
yeah.
of what you're doing now and both in the future. So, but yeah, I tend to be ahead of the curve and then build into that curve so that there's a strong foundation when there's a straightaway, so to say.
Do you think that it gives you an amazing advantage compared to the people who's just gonna be starting out when it actually is in the curve, even if they have big finances behind them?
Most of the time, yeah. That's also why you see a lot of big incumbent players just go straight up the acquisition route with startups, right? So it's sometimes risky. It's a risky game to play in that sense, and people can enter later and kind of eat off the foundation that you've built. But with things like Copernic Space, with marketplaces in general, first mover advantage tends to be a big thing, because it might seem kind of nascent or not a big market right away, but once again, there's that moment where it pops, and you've seen that in every type of marketplace, pretty much in the digital economy.
And space is not the main topic of most of your first companies that you helped founded. What's the decision on why you founded Copernic Space now?
So it as a concept and work we
Yeah.
started doing on it started 8 years ago at this point. So way before I ever founded it. So I was starting to build Coin Firm really when that was becoming a concept as well, because my co-founder and my mother, Lady Rocket, we were already involved in activities around the space economy. She's been active around that for decades in various ways, and we realized, hey, well, this market is already was space already is one of the most important, let's say, markets of the past 60 years. It's responsible for a good amount of the most important technological solutions, inventions, which I can, go across a million of them. And now that market's privatized very recently, but that market really hasn't been created. So we understood that, okay, you have hundreds, thousands of emerging, entrepreneurs and what we call space assets on one end. And then on the other end, you have millions of individuals, companies, investors, organizations all around the world that want to access or can benefit from this market. But no one's created really how that market works, and that what I call like the economic infrastructure and the models, and then the marketplace on top that facilitates that connection, that discovery, and then the transaction, trade, utilization of all these assets and opportunities. Um, and we feel until that happens, the space market really won't uh, be what it should be, and will also enable itself to be very, very centralized and archaic.
Is it correct that most of the innovations that we cherish now, because most of the innovations are coming from the technologies that are created by these privatized space companies?
Uh, like I said, in the past and now even more so in the future, that'll be the
Yeah.
case because it can scale a little bit more since it's a private market, especially if like tools and solutions like ours are out. So, whether it's, a lot of the tech that goes into,
Yeah.
this running and functioning to, solar panels, et cetera, were originally built for space, actually work best in space. And we even have cases next year, where we're working on really what's the future and the infrastructure for computation, AI, crypto
Yeah.
mining by utilizing space. So whether it's the origin or the future, a lot of the solutions for the things you care about or the market are going to originate in space, are going to come from space.
Now, since you're wearing the NASA jacket, I just want to ask the questions. How, since you're more aware of the space industry, how fast did it actually innovate once the private companies started getting into it?
Well, I think obviously Musk is
Yeah.
kind of a catalyst for that, and to kind of tie back to what I was saying around, ahead of the curve or people not really understanding what you're doing until it pops. He had to spend pretty much like his last $100 million um, to create SpaceX in the first place. People didn't really see that, and I think that is a catalyst moment that enabled it, to go faster. So now, since SpaceX got its first contract from NASA, which was big for them, right? Musk will admit that. Uh, it's also shown and enabled that now you see that NASA is actually contracting private space companies to do most of this stuff. They're not developing and launching it in house. So, there's been a total switch. And as with anything, if you centralize something so much, give it limited resources, and don't
Yeah.
build any sort of other models or capabilities for more resources and faster speed and scalability to flow, it's going to suffer. So that opening that up, and now there being space VCs. and things like that, which we can get into the limitations of that as well. But it's creating these steps to where the scale and speed of these solutions can just be developed so much faster.
And what is the main mission of Copernic Space in all of this? What's your goal?
To serve as that commercial and financial infrastructure and marketplace to create standards enable for space assets to be accessible across the whole market. So on one end, how do we fuel and finance the creation of these space assets with models that are built specifically for space? And on the flip side, how do we take those space assets and build the models to commercialize them across as diverse a section of the commercial market and individuals across the world? So, we're a marketplace for these space assets, but because this market, these standards haven't yet be created for the market, we work with space companies on, okay, well, how do you tokenize this asset? What are the proper ways to commercialize it? As well as that from the financing end, right? Really digging deep into what are the solutions needed specifically for space and what's really happening there, and how do you build a model that's viable, that not only fuels that space venture, but enables the liquidity providers or whoever it is to have an asset that has some sort of either utility or economic benefit.
Why choose blockchain technology for the creation of your marketplace? Why not just integrate traditional finance?
Yeah, well, I've been in the market for over a decade, like I said, and I view blockchain and crypto really as economic infrastructure tech. So you'll hear me, using certain terms like that. And, almost every other market has legacy systems, decades of administrative bureaucratic processes around it, et cetera, that make it very hard for you to dig in at that foundation and really use it as the infrastructure for how that market operates, right? But because space is so young and immature, we have that opportunity to make the space market more decentralized, more liquid, more horizontal, and scalable than the foundations of other markets, and turning these big, hard to access, expensive, exclusive assets and be able to break them down into unique units of ownership, utility, and then also create secondary markets for these assets to change the dynamic of how liquidity moves in and out of space ventures and the space economy overall. So we believe that it's the biggest opportunity for blockchain market overall, as well as an opportunity for space to be built on a more progressive and a democratized economic infrastructure.
And as you said, what you did in CoinFirm was more safe in terms of compared to traditional money systems that we have in place. Is that one
Mhm.
of the highest motivations that you had to use blockchain for your Copernic space?
Well, I think the decentralization and unique ownership part is important. It provides also another level of transparency and security, and also you can automate and create more trusted, um, let's say, terms around particular assets utilizing blockchain. So we can program in the smart contracts, whether it's what we call a real world space asset, which an example is like a satellite imagery license. So we can program in that the terms of the license, and then the token serves as a secure key directly into that data under that license. Or what we call, financial space assets, which are the tokenized financial instruments, investments into space assets or ventures, and have a unique sense of ownership, not sense, but actual unique ownership that you own and you can trade across our marketplace according to regulations, obviously. But yeah, there's a transparency and security part of it that really sits at the core of the values that this technology can provide to markets and to players in it.
By the way, on your website, you have something called space passports. What are those, and what does a different year give you access to?
Yeah, so we not only wanted to set, the highest standards of how tokenization is applied in this case to, space assets, but also how this can be applied to how to build new user commercial and consumer engagement with products and platforms and opportunities like we're creating. We also understood, and one thing that kind of the crypto or the Web3 market has revolutionized that's not going to go away no matter what, you may think about the tech or the ecosystem is the idea of community behind a venture, behind a product, behind a platform, which we understood that, hey, let's give people some benefits, sense of ownership, access, um, in our platform, both on the platform as well as in real life, to where they can also help us grow, not just our platform, but the space economy as a whole. So, our passports are these unique digital memberships that our platform will recognize if you have them in your account, and will unlock loads of different benefits, exclusive access or discounts, et cetera, as well as like a reseller system, a verified reseller system. So if we have assets or opportunities on our platform, passport holders can go and spread that and generate their own revenue out of the value that they generate and put in. So it's a different take on and the next era of what people would look at as NFTs. Um, so we utilize that technology really to do, amazing things, and once again create different models and benefits for the space economy and those who want to access it.
What sets Copernic Space apart from what I saw is that most, if not all, of your founders are from Fortune 100 companies and Web3 companies. What do you think their experiences is bringing to the table to ensure the success of Copernic Space?
Well, I think there's probably a handful of people in the world that know how to kind of put this together in some way like this, which means having this intersection of platform slash marketplaces, a deep understanding of blockchain, not just from a business conceptual model end like me, but also, you got to dig deep into the tech as well. And then the other aspect is the space economy, right? So whether it's myself, my co-founder, Lady Rocket, our product team, or people who are next to us, like Kevin O'Connell, who's the former director of space commerce at the U.S. Department of Commerce. We not only have, let's say, the access points, but a unique array of competencies, to put it all together. And then you have just the straight character things, building a startup, something that is transformative, takes a lot of perseverance, right? It takes a lot of risk, personal risk tolerance, and stress around it. So a lot of times, success of startups is based off the qualities and characters of the people leading it, and their tolerance for certain things and their capability to creatively solve certain situations, right? Because nothing is a straight road, that everything is the way you expect it to be.
What types of digital assets do you currently have now in Copernic Space? Or do you not have any yet?
So our platform will eventually have three applications on it. The first one, like we released publicly, seriously, is called Spaceables, and that's just for the culture of space. So that's digital collectibles, art, music, etc. Why do we do that? Not because it was ever going to be the largest, let's say, revenue driver or the main thing behind Copernic Space, but it's how we emotionally engage a wide segment of the
Yes.
market and be able to onboard them onto something that isn't very
Yeah.
challenging, and then move them across, into the space economy, the real world space asset opportunities, etc. During that time, well, before that, even, we were already working with space companies on creating standards for certain types of assets within the space asset class. The first standard we built with Lunar Outpost is what we call physical payload standard. So that's how do I create an asset out of physical space available, whether it's rockets or it's rovers or landers, and then how do I enable access and then creation of new assets off of what's being put into that space, right? So it's not just about the space. It goes, okay, what's in there, whether it's a satellite or a Nike shoe, whatever it may be, what's in there, and how do I verify and create a new asset out of that, and then commercialize, trade that asset further, right? Then we built something called digital payload standard, which we realized that digital space capacity computation is going to be even more scalable and in demand in some ways than physical space will be. So we built a similar standard, just focused on the digital side of things. After that, we did a small kind of, not that small, but a proof of concept sale with a European rocket company called Space Forest and their parent rocket. So we tokenized 24 slots, put that on our marketplace, sold that out, and followed the standard accordingly afterwards and tokenized those assets. And this year, for the digital payload standard, we decided to invest our own capital, acquire our own digital space, so to say, on a lunar mission, and we've democratized access so that around 2,000 unique assets are going to be sent to the moon on our mission launching in November. And then we'll utilize that standard to verify and tokenize ownership of those assets on the lunar surface, where people can list and trade them further. So by the end of the year, beginning next year, you should be able to buy and trade ownership of what we call real world space assets that are on the lunar surface. After that, we already have some other missions, different sort of cases aligned. I can, go into if you want later, as well as working on the launch of the first, what we call financial space asset opportunities. So once again, those tokenized investments, liquidity being provided into the space assets or venture themselves. And we have, great regulated partners to start doing that beginning of next year, hopefully.
It's amazing. And with the rapid innovations currently happening in the space industry in around 10 years, what do you think are the most common assets that is going to be sold in your marketplace?
Well, I think the one that has the most kind of ability for the most amount of people to participate are going to be the financial space assets. So we want to break it down to whether you got $100 or $100 million. Having that sort of access and opportunity in space is there, as well as for the space ventures who lack proper kind of liquidity lines and financing models specifically for them and for space. On the real world space asset end, although the payload stuff is amazing, and that's a core part of the business, that's SpaceX's main business model. What we kind of like the most is breaking down access to satellite imagery, data, and unlocking what we see as countless billions of dollars of intellectual property that's kind of stored away and not easily accessible, that's in space.
We've been talking about decentralization for some time now. What actually is the main goal or the main selling point of decentralization, and why a lot of people are interested in it, and what is the benefit of it compares to the
Well,
traditional method?
I think markets are more transparent, fluid, fair. The more that they're decentralized, that's not like it's not like an ideological statement. It's kind of a law almost, in a way. And when it comes to something like space, where we're building it from the foundation, you don't want to end up being a market with a couple companies, a couple nation states, and very kind of hard to break barriers to access it in any way, because once again, space is creating the most important, solutions of the future. And the less competition, the less fire around it, um, the less of that is going to be created. So it's also about how people access things, right? So how can we enable as many of people to access this, and on the other side, enable as many space ventures as possible to have such sort of solution. So obviously, there's ideological things behind the idea of decentralization for a lot of people, but even for us as a company, in more decentralized markets, there's also less risk on us. Like, I don't want to have custody of all of this stuff that are important to the entities or people, et cetera. So I don't want to hold your assets. I want to hold your funds. I don't want to hold your funds at all, if possible, et cetera. So decentralization and advancements of tech around that, like crypto and blockchain, I think are extremely important for these economic infrastructures, how these markets should really be run.
What are the main things that you realized and learned from being in the forefront of many startups in your life?
um, uh, that's a tough question because there's a lot. It comes back to some of that character stuff, where really anything is kind of possible in a way. It's all matter of kind of your attitude, how you approach it. Um, there's My mother told me this many years ago. I think it's been kind of more famous because I saw Tom Hanks do it recently, where this too shall pass, which is nothing's the end of the world really. Okay, unless we're talking about health or something like that, right? And this too shall pass, both the good and the bad, right? So celebrate your wins, but understand that that's not the end goal. There is no end, to this really. So I'd say the perseverance and the character things are as big, if not bigger, as anything else. Um, Yeah, I'd kind of leave it at that because there's a million things that I could go on that this teaches you about people, about yourself, most importantly, and if you're honest with yourself, doing something like this can painfully expose yourself to yourself, and it's up to you whether you let that beat you down, or you don't address it, or you run through it.
What do you think are the main misconceptions and the things people don't realize about startups?
Uh, it's I think it's been kind of glamorized to a certain point, right? And it's become something for everybody to try. I wouldn't say it's even good for it's not good for everybody. Um, it's extremely hard. It can be very lonely. You're gonna hear no all the time, or people aren't gonna understand you. Uh, and you just have to get used to it. I'm a creative type. I'm a tend to be more emotional, I think. So those things can affect you, but there's also people that just aren't affected by that at all. And I think you need to have some sense of awareness, because feedback is important, but you need to ignore most of it. And once again, it goes back to the perseverance aspect. So it's not the luxurious life that it's shown, but the value you create and the rewards at the end of the day are bigger than if you were to do it a different way.
Do you think, with all the knowledge and experience that you now have, if you can go back in time and work again on your startup when you were 19, do you think you could have pulled it off?
Mm, I mean, it would be tough to say no. Um, It would be tough to say no, but I would say no unless we pivoted. I mean, it's such a hard question to answer. Hindsight's 2020 with everything, and even at that point, one thing I have learned is like some things are just in God's hands, so to say. You can create your luck, but at the end of the day, there is luck. Uh, yeah, I would do a lot better. I would do a lot better. It would have. What's success also? So I think we need to define what that is first before. Does that mean what you're at a 50 million valuation? Does that mean you exit it? Does that mean you know what's the measure of success? 90 something percent of startups don't even get past the first funding round, really, right? So what's success?
Yeah, it is a tough question.
It's just like one another wise sort of
Yeah,
thing for some people maybe is like define your stopping point. What's your
yeah,
not success, right? When is it, if I don't do this by this time, then, because like I said, it's a sacrifice. So you can't, some people can't just keep running their head through the wall into the wall until the wall finally breaks, right?
yeah. Well, going back to Copernic space, what future developments do you planning to have for Copernic space?
Yeah,
What
so
things
moon
do you want to add?
Yeah, so moon mission end of the year, that's big. We're hyper focused on that, right? In the meantime, like I said in the back, we're arranging some future sales and opportunities on our and new kind of models or assets for next year and the year after. I'm really excited to get kind of these first tokenized financial space assets out with our partners. Really plant our flag and the models around that. Next year, I also want to focus on these more of these digital assets. So, how do we build the standards to easily access and utilize things like satellite data licenses, imagery licenses, etc. We think that really has you open that up, you can have fast, impactful, tangible benefits for life on Earth. And we have some awesome cases that we're working on with brands. So we're very creative about how to bring in the wider commercial market into space and create unique space assets with the commercial market that they can further utilize for their consumers, users, et cetera, here on Earth. So our issue is not things to do. We fight more with the market catching up to what we're doing in a way that puts the amount of fuel in our metaphorical rocket that we want and need.
Are there any technologies that are just emerging that you're particularly interested in to integrating for Copernic space?
Um, well, here's the thing, although we get very hands on with the cases and the assets that are on our platform and marketplace,
Yeah,
we're more there to, create the standards, facilitate, streamline how those assets are accessed.
yeah.
So, yeah, utilizing AI in some way, obviously, but I think that's more important for the partners and the applications that are putting the assets on our platform. Um, I'm looking at more how we can build a that commercial and financial infrastructure in the marketplace in ways that fuels those big technological advancements, scientific advancements. Whether that's how people are seeing how different food, et cetera, grows in space, how that can be used on Earth, what pharmaceutical companies are doing, or even a project we have set for next year, which is utilizing a satellite to do the first crypto mining proof of concept in space. Why is that important? Is because that sets a foundation for overall computation, AI in space, which we believe some of our partners think within 5 years, but I think it's more like 10 years, you can more efficiently and effectively and more sustainably do computation, AI, and mining in space than you do on Earth.
Since what you do is kind of new for a lot of people,
It is.
what resources or support do Copernic Space provide for the users to help them navigate and actually learn how to be a part of this?
Yeah, so that comes back to that community approach. So, what we've done is created a large community that we engage with multiple times a week. So, what we do is we have community spaces with. Oh, sorry, I got another call popping up. Apologies. um, so we host multiple community spaces every week with hundreds of our users, where we make myself, Lady Rocket, our partners, clients available to them. That's also one thing with being a passport holders. We take kind of one-on-one time with some of these entities that, let's say, are more ambitious and incentivized to do things. So that's why a lot of participants in the moon mission are users that we've had on the platform for a certain amount of time. So we understand that one of the big important things for us is communication and education, and once again turning that curve into a straightaway for us. So we're very engaged with, let's say, the education part, and I try to make myself directly as a person as available as possible.
Personally, what are the major challenges, the biggest challenges that you've encountered in making space assets actually accessible, and how have you addressed them?
Can you say that again, please?
What are the biggest challenges that you have encountered in making space assets available?
Mm. Well, on one side, you have the space industry, which is still, maturing, so to say. So it tends to be a little bit more traditional around that. So it's not like every space company just runs at it. But one thing I've learned is if you show them the opportunity and you show them a dollar sign behind it, they'll generally run after it. So which meant that over some time span, I understood that, okay, I really need to capture the commercial market and the investors and bring them on. Which, like I said, there's millions of people that want to get into space, but they've never been provided that access, and space is intimidating, right? So people are like, well, I'm not a specialist in space, etc. So we're really inventing kind of the models and how to engage, whether it's a brand or it's a person or a corporate, on how to relay that value and then bring them in, into being participants. So that's been a little bit more of the struggle.
In what ways do you think what you're doing in Copernic Space actually influence the broader space industry as a whole?
Oh, well, we're already starting to see it in some way. So there's whether they're commercial, like private commercial players that aren't space companies in the traditional sense that build rockets, et cetera, starting to kind of engage with, for example, the crypto market, right? There's a bunch of projects that are like that. Um, there's different entities who are now talking about, space assets. Also, you see these space companies are um, looking more at how to engage a new user base, right? Using digital. So we know what we're doing is going to happen, right? We're building a macroeconomic, a horizontal solution for a market that is very fragmented and very focused on hyper verticals. So we know it's just a matter of time, and we're seeing inspiration pop up and things like that. So those are all good signs, and even direct competition is a good sign, right?
That's fantastic. And since we're nearing the end of the podcast, do you mind letting us know how did CoinFirm contribute to the blockchain's industry growth, especially in terms of security and transparency?
Well, there's a lot of examples of that. So, but we were really the bridge. We understood that providing this sort of platform or solution would be the
Yeah,
bridge that enables crypto to be not just more entry players into
yeah,
that market, but
yeah,
also enable the market to make
yeah,
itself accessible to a larger group of people, right? And you've seen that. I think Coinbase is a great example of a success of a player who's approaching things the right way and building as many bridges as possible. So we just knew that that was going to be a bridge and one of the main kind of connecting points for crypto, and it was important for
yeah,
us to do so in a way to where small startups could
yeah.
become players as well.
A few years ago with the crypto boom, how different would it actually have been if there is no company that is doing what you're doing?
Well, it would be kept in the shadows, is what I
Yeah.
would say.
Do you think it would not be as big as it is now?
No, because it wouldn't be able to, kind of onboard traditional players at all.
There's gonna be a lot of risk for the big players, so there's not
Yeah,
gonna be a lot of
they weren't even able to determine that risk. That's the thing, right?
yeah,
So AML is not a perfect game. None of this stuff's a perfect
yeah,
game. It's about determining the potential risk and acting accordingly. If there's no system that's even enabling you to kind of
yeah,
analyze that risk, then you can't even take it on.
yeah. And what are the exciting things that you are planning to have for Copernic in the near future? Any announcements that you have?
Yeah, so new platform
Yeah,
comes out within the next month and a half. We're going to have some releases that we're testing with our user base, our passport holders, but that's the big thing. And then the moon mission, and I'll be announcing some future sales here over the next couple months as well.
what advice would you give to young entrepreneurs who are interested in getting into the space industry?
It's the time to do it now. It's a young, early market. You can be an entrant, plant your flag.
Yeah,
Don't be worried about, don't be intimidated by the space economy. I'm no physicist, so yeah, now's the time to enter. It needs every type of person.
yeah. If you could go back and give yourself younger self one piece of advice, what would it be?
Uh, be patient, be calm, and pick your spots.
It's fantastic. And do you have any overall advice in life?
Same thing I just said.
Fantastic. And where can people find you and covering space?
Yeah, so me on social media at GB Savant, GBSAVANT, or just search my name, it should pop up. Copernic Space, same thing, easy to find at Copernic Space on Twitter, which is really where you'll see kind of the community run there and on Discord. Same as under LinkedIn. And also, when the new platform comes out, make sure to come on the platform, on the marketplace. Check out what's happening there.
Awesome. And again, thank you for joining us on the New World Podcast.
Thanks, buddy.
That's all for today's episode of the New World Podcast. We have explored some fascinating topics with our amazing guests, shedding light on the upcoming New World. If you enjoyed today's episode and today's discussion and want to stay updated the future episodes, don't forget to hit that subscribe button to the podcast. And if you found value on what we have discussed, please consider leaving us a review on your favorite podcast platform. Remember, if you have any questions or topics you'd like us to cover, or if you are interested in being a guest in the future, please feel free to reach out to me via LinkedIn or email me at john.paul@aicinix.com and add New World Podcast, all capital, in the subject line so I can see it. I always love hearing from our listeners. And don't forget to check out our amazing guests. You can find more information about them by the contact details we provided earlier. Again, thank you for tuning in on the New World Podcast. I know your time is very important and I try to always make the next episode better than the last. Until next time, keep learning, keep growing, keep innovating. This is John Paul Flores signing off from the New World Podcast.